terms of using certain footage versus not using, what was your test to know this isn't going to work? It's great, I love it, but this, for the film, it just won't work.
This is the hardest part. And that's where you need a great editor. And I was fortunate to have a great editor. Edward Osejima, who was named in the New York Times Review as a brilliant editor, deserves that accolade. You know, we had probably 300 hours of footage between interviews and stock footage and stills and performances. And Edward and I talked a lot about structure, about how we saw this, about how it was defined in a 3-act format. And this again is where my formal training comes in. You know, I have a real sense of beginning, middle, and end, and narrative structure, and threads that weave through. And Edward and I talked about this, about where I saw the first act ending, where I felt the second act ended, what the third act was, and what the narrative threads were through the whole thing, which, as you know, racism comes into it, and the women's struggle comes into it, and the music world comes into it. So we had a pretty good meeting of the minds about what the thematic things of the film would be and what the structure would be. And then I gave everything to Edward and said, okay, start cutting. And he would come to me every day with pieces that he had cut. And, you know, some of them I would just be in heaven with what he had done. Other ones, I didn't think they quite worked. Other things I wanted in, he fought against. Other things he thought were really good, I fought against. We had a really creatively combative situation, which I find to be the best way to work with somebody else. You know, not that your editor says everything you want is wonderful, but that your editor has creative ideas of their own. And that was the process, and that was the most enjoyable process. The editing process was just really fabulous.
So your editor should not be a yes man or woman.
Exactly.
They should, you know, assert themselves.
Exactly.
In some ways. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How can you tell, though, if somebody wants complete control of it? I mean, how do you find that balance?
Well, if they're not listening to you, if they're not hearing what you're saying, and they're coming back with something that has nothing to do with what you asked for, then you know you've got the wrong editor. But with Edward, whatever he came back with was what I asked for and more. So I thought, oh my God, you know, he's taking this to places that I hadn't even envisioned. And that's what you want from your editor.